"Who the fuck broke your hip?" asked the Mafia boss. What he next made headlines. The marble floor's chill seeps through Lena's clothes as pain radiates from her hip. Her heart pounds against her ribs as she stares up at the man whose reputation precedes him like a dark shadow. Nico Moretti towers over her, his tailored suit doing nothing to soften his dangerous presence. "Who the fuck broke your hip?" His question comes out as a snarl, but there's something else in his tone. A hint of concern that seems out of place coming from Chicago's most feared crime boss. Lena grits her teeth, refusing to show weakness. "Your gorilla of a guard shoved me." She tries to push herself up, but falters, another bolt of pain shooting through her side. Nico's dark eyes narrow, and he turns to the guard responsible. The man pales, taking a step back. "Get out," Nico orders, his voice deadly quiet. The guard practically runs from the room. "I'll deal with him later." Nico crouches down beside her, close enough that Lena can smell his expensive cologne. "Now, Miss Alvarez, let's discuss why you were snooping around my business affairs. I'm a journalist. It's my job to expose the truth." Lena meets his gaze steadily, even as her pulse races. "The public deserves to know what really happened at the docks last week." A muscle ticks in Nico's jaw. "The public deserves to mind their own fucking business." He reaches out, and Lena flinches, but his touch is surprisingly gentle as he helps her to her feet. "And you need to learn when to stop digging." Lena sways, her hip protesting the movement. Nico's arm slides around her waist, supporting her weight. The contact sends an unwanted shiver down her spine. "I won't stop," she says, hating how her voice wavers. "You can't intimidate me into silence." A dark chuckle rumbles from his chest. "Can't I?" His fingers tighten on her waist. "You have no idea what I'm capable of, Bella." 2 more guards enter the room, responding to some unseen signal from their boss. Lena's stomach drops as she realizes this isn't going to end with a simple warning. "You should have stayed away," Nico says, stepping back. "Now I can't let you leave." "You can't keep me here!" Lena tries to pull away from the approaching guards, but her injured hip betrays her. Pain flares through her body as they grab her arms. "I can do whatever I want." Nico watches as his men drag her toward the door, his expression unreadable. "You're in my world now." Lena struggles against their grip, ignoring the agony in her hip. "People will look for me. My editor knows I was investigating you." "Let them look." Nico follows behind them, his footsteps echoing through the marble hallway. "They won't find anything." The guards pull her through the mansion's grand entrance, where a black SUV idles in the circular driveway. Lena's heart races faster as reality sets in. She's being kidnapped by one of the most dangerous men in Chicago. "You're mine now," Nico growls from behind her, his words sending ice through her veins. The finality in his tone leaves no room for argument as they approach the waiting vehicle. Before you continue listening, please let me know where in the world are you watching from today. Now back to the story. The marble floors echo with each forceful step as Nico's men drag Lena through the winding corridors of his estate. Her hip throbs where she fell, but she grits her teeth, refusing to show weakness. The men's grip on her arms is bruising, yet she keeps her chin high, green eyes blazing with defiance. "Let go of me," she demands, voice steady despite the flutter of panic in her chest. The guards exchange knowing looks but say nothing, their faces impassive masks as they continue their march. The estate is a maze of cold opulence, crystal chandeliers casting prismatic shadows across cream-colored walls, priceless art pieces that seem to mock her with their serenity. Everything screams of old money and power, the kind that makes its own rules. Lena's journalist instincts kick in, cataloging details even as she struggles. Security cameras at every corner. Heavy wooden doors with electronic locks. Armed men positioned at strategic points, their suit jackets barely concealing their weapons. This isn't just a home. It's a fortress. She twists suddenly, using her smaller frame to try to slip free, but the guards anticipate her move. One of them tightens his grip, while the other lets out an annoyed grunt. "Ms. Alvarez," the guard on her right warns, "don't make this harder than it needs to be." "Harder?" Lena lets out a harsh laugh. "I'm being kidnapped by the mob. How exactly should I be making this easier for you?" The pain in her hip flares as they round another corner, but she swallows the gasp that threatens to escape. She won't give them the satisfaction. Her mind races, analyzing possible escape routes, counting steps and turns, looking for anything she can use to her advantage. They enter a vast foyer, and Lena's breath catches despite herself. The ceiling soars 3 stories high, crowned by a massive crystal chandelier that throws rainbow prisms across the marble floor. A grand staircase curves up both sides of the space, its railings gleaming gold in the afternoon light, streaming through tall windows. It's beautiful and terrifying. The guards loosen their grip slightly, perhaps thinking she's too awed to try anything. Lena seizes her chance. She drives her elbow back into one guard's solar plexus, while simultaneously stomping on the other's instep. Their surprise gives her just enough space to wrench free. She sprints towards the massive front doors, heart pounding. Freedom is just yards away. Her hip screams in protest, but adrenaline pushes her forward. 3 steps. 2 steps. 1. "You can't run, sweetheart." The voice slides through the air like silk over steel. "You're mine, and you're going nowhere." Lena freezes. Nico emerges from a side doorway, his movements fluid and predatory. His dark suit is immaculate, not a single black hair out of place. But his eyes burn with something that makes her stomach clench. He stalks toward her, and Lena finds herself backing away instinctively. Her back hits one of the marble columns, and she realizes with crystal clarity that she's trapped. The guards move to flank the doors. Security cameras track her every move. And Nico watches her with the focused intensity of a wolf who's cornered his prey. The truth crashes over her like ice water. There is no escape. Not from this place. Not from him. The realization settles in her bones, heavy and cold, even as she lifts her chin in defiance. The renowned journalist who's exposed countless criminals, who's faced down threats and intimidation without flinching, finds herself truly afraid for the first time. Not of death. She's made peace with that possibility in her line of work. No, what terrifies her is the look in Nico's eyes, the one that says he has plans for her. Plans that have nothing to do with killing her, and everything to do with keeping her. The silk curtains billowed in the evening breeze, a deceptively peaceful sight in what was essentially her prison. Lena's hip throbbed with each step as she paced the perimeter of the luxurious guest room, her fingers trailing along cool marble surfaces and plush furnishings that probably cost more than her yearly salary. "Think, Lena. Think," she muttered, studying every corner, every possible escape route. The windows, though large and ornate, were sealed shut. 2 armed guards stood outside her door. She'd heard their heavy footsteps and murmured conversations. Even the beautiful crystal vase on the bedside table, while a potential weapon, would be useless against an army of armed men. She stopped at the floor-to-ceiling mirror, taking in her disheveled appearance. Her dark hair was a mess, her blouse wrinkled from the earlier struggle. A bruise was forming on her arm where they'd grabbed her. But it was her eyes that caught her attention. They still blazed with determination, despite everything. This wasn't her first dangerous situation. As an investigative journalist, she'd faced threats before. But Nico Moretti was different. The way he'd looked at her, with that mix of fury and something else she couldn't quite name, it sent shivers down her spine. Lena limped to the bed, trying to ignore the pain in her hip. She needed to think clearly, to strategize. Her phone was gone, her contacts unreachable. Would anyone even notice she was missing? Her editor knew she was investigating the Moretti family, but she hadn't shared her exact location. The sound of footsteps in the hallway made her freeze. These weren't the guards' steps. These were purposeful, powerful. Her heart rate quickened as they grew closer. The door opened without a knock. Nico filled the doorframe, his broad shoulders blocking the light from the hallway. He'd shed his suit jacket, and his white shirt sleeves were rolled up to reveal muscled forearms. The dim lighting cast shadows across his sharp features, making him look even more dangerous. Lena straightened her spine, refusing to show weakness. She met his intense gaze head-on, even as her pulse raced. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken threats and defiance. He stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. Each step he took toward her was measured, predatory. Lena held her ground, though every instinct screamed at her to back away. He stopped just a few feet from her, close enough that she could smell his expensive cologne, mixed with something darker, more primal. His dark eyes raked over her, lingering on the bruise on her arm. Something flickered across his face. Was that anger? But it was gone before she could be sure. "Don't waste your time looking for a way out," he said, his voice low and controlled. "Every exit is guarded, every phone line is monitored, every person in this compound answers to me." "You can't keep me here forever," Lena shot back, her voice steadier than she felt. "People will notice I'm missing." A cold smile curved his lips. "Let them notice. No one will find you unless I want them to." She lifted her chin. "Is that supposed to scare me?" "No," he said, taking another step closer. "It's supposed to make you understand your situation. You stepped into my world, Miss Alvarez. You don't get to dictate the terms of your stay." The heat radiating from his body made it hard to think clearly. She could see the power in his frame, the lethal grace in his movements. This was a man used to taking what he wanted. Consequences be damned. His eyes burned into hers as he delivered his final verdict. "I don't care if you hate me, Lena. You'll stay here until I decide what to do with you." The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the luxurious guest room as Lena stood her ground, chin lifted in defiance. Her hip still ached from the fall, but she refused to show weakness. Years of interviewing dangerous people had taught her how to maintain composure under pressure. "Mr. Moretti," she began, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "We both know my article could benefit you. The right narrative could strengthen your position in—" "Benefit me?" Nico's dark laugh cut through the air like a blade. He moved closer, his expensive Italian suit emphasizing his powerful frame. "You think you can talk your way out of this?" A dangerous smile played at his lips, but his eyes remained cold. "I've read your work, Miss Alvarez. You don't write puff pieces." Lena refused to back down, even as he invaded her personal space. "Every story has multiple angles. I'm offering you a chance to control the narrative." "Control?" His voice dropped lower, sending an involuntary shiver down her spine. "I already have control. You're in my home, at my mercy." "And what good does that do you?" Lena countered, forcing herself to maintain eye contact. "Keeping me here only proves I'm onto something big. Something you're afraid of." His hand shot out, gripping her chin. Not hard enough to hurt, but firm enough to remind her of his power. I'm not afraid of anything, least of all a nosy journalist who doesn't know when to quit. Lena's pulse quickened, but she kept her voice level. Then prove it. Let me write the story. Show everyone you have nothing to hide. Nico studied her face intently, his thumb brushing across her lower lip in a gesture that felt both threatening and oddly intimate. You really don't understand the game you're playing, do you? I understand perfectly, she replied, fighting the urge to step back. I've spent years exposing criminals like me? He released her chin, but remained close enough that she could smell his expensive cologne. Tell me, Miss Alvarez, how many of those criminals let you live after you exposed their secrets? The question hung heavy in the air. Lena swallowed hard, remembering the death threats, the close calls, the nights spent looking over her shoulder. But she'd always managed to stay one step ahead. Until now. I have a proposition for you, Nico said, his tone shifting to something more businesslike. Since you're so determined to write your story. He circled her slowly, like a predator sizing up its prey. You'll stay here, under my roof and my protection. Continue your investigation, with certain limitations, of course. But you don't publish anything without my approval. And if I refuse? Then I make sure every lead you've cultivated, every source you've found, every piece of evidence you've gathered, disappears. His threat was delivered with the casual ease of someone discussing the weather. And trust me, I don't just mean the documents. Lena felt the blood drain from her face. She knew he wasn't bluffing. His reputation for ruthlessness was well documented. But staying here, under his watchful eye, it would be like living in a gilded cage. You're giving me a choice between being your prisoner or watching my investigation crumble? She asked bitterly. I'm giving you a chance to survive your own ambition, he corrected. Think carefully, Miss Alvarez. This offer expires the moment I walk out that door. Lena's mind raced, weighing her options. Refusing meant losing months of work and potentially endangering her sources. Accepting meant putting herself at the mercy of a man who'd already shown he had no qualms about using force. Fine, she said finally, the word tasting like ash in her mouth. I'll stay, but I won't be your puppet. The dining room dripped with old-world luxury, all dark wood and crystal chandeliers. Lena's heels clicked against marble floors as Nico guided her with a firm hand on her lower back. Her hip still ached from their earlier confrontation, each step a reminder of her precarious situation. Around the massive table sat Nico's inner circle, men with cold eyes and scarred knuckles. They sized her up like wolves eyeing fresh meat. The air felt thick with unspoken threats and barely concealed violence. Sit, Nico commanded, pulling out a chair beside his place at the head of the table. His fingers brushed her shoulder as she lowered herself, sending an unwanted shiver down her spine. The first course arrived, some fancy Italian dish she couldn't pronounce. Lena picked at her food, too aware of the eyes watching her every move, especially his. Even when speaking to others, Nico's attention never fully left her. So, Miss Alvarez, drawled one of the men. Marco, she thought she'd heard someone call him. What made you think investigating the Moretti family was a smart career move? Before she could answer, Nico's hand landed on her thigh under the table, his grip tight. A warning. She's not here to be interrogated, Nico said, his voice carrying that dangerous edge she was becoming familiar with. She's here as my guest. Guest? The word made her want to laugh. Prisoners weren't guests, no matter how gilded their cage. Of course, boss. Marco backed down immediately, but his eyes held something calculating when they flickered to her. The conversation moved on, but Nico's hand remained on her thigh, burning through the fabric of her dress. She tried to focus on the plate before her, but her mind kept circling back to the heat of his touch, the possessive way he'd positioned her at his right hand. When the main course arrived, Lena finally gathered her courage. "You can't keep me here forever," she whispered, meant for his ears alone. His fingers tightened fractionally. "Watch me." She turned to face him fully then, anger overriding her better judgment. "I'm not one of your soldiers. You can't just—" "Careful, Tesoro," he murmured, dark eyes fixed on her lips. "You're drawing attention." She glanced around, noting how the conversations had dulled, how every man at the table was watching their interaction with barely concealed interest. Heat crept up her neck. "You're enjoying this," she accused quietly. "Having me trapped here, on display for your men to see who's in control?" A small smile played at the corners of his mouth, dangerous and oddly intimate. "You have no idea what I enjoy, Lena." The way he said her name made it sound like a sin. She shifted in her seat, trying to put some distance between them, but his grip remained firm. "Let go of me." "No." Simple. Direct. Final. The rest of dinner passed in a blur of tension and unspoken threats. Lena barely tasted the expensive wine, barely registered the faces of the men around her. All she could focus on was Nico's presence beside her, the weight of his hand on her thigh, the way he seemed to fill all the space around her with his darkness. When the last plates were cleared, Nico stood, pulling her up with him. "Time for a tour," he announced, to no one in particular, though his men nodded in acknowledgement. She tried to step away, but he caught her arm, drawing her close. The other men filed out, leaving them alone in the ornate dining room. Lena's heart hammered against her ribs as she met his gaze defiantly. His eyes darkened as they traveled over her face, lingering on her mouth. He stepped closer, until she could feel the heat radiating from his body. Then he moved behind her, his chest brushing her back. His breath was hot against her neck when he spoke. "Keep looking at me like that, and you'll see just how far I'm willing to go to keep you close," he whispered. The grand dining room buzzed with hushed conversations and the gentle clink of crystal glasses. Lena sat rigidly in her chair, hyper-aware of every movement around her. The room dripped with luxury, ornate chandeliers, dark mahogany furniture, and priceless artwork that seemed to mock the brutality of its inhabitants. From her position at the long table, she had a clear view of Nico as he spoke with his sister Sophia near the fireplace. The transformation in his demeanor was startling. The hard lines of his face softened, and his usual predatory stance relaxed. Sophia's gentle laughter carried across the room as she touched her brother's arm, and Nico's lips curved into a genuine smile, so different from his usual calculating smirk. Lena's fingers tightened around her wine glass. This wasn't the Nico she knew, the man who had threatened and imprisoned her, who ruled his empire with bloody efficiency. This was someone else entirely, and the contrast made her stomach twist uncomfortably. Sophia said something that made Nico throw his head back and laugh, the sound rich and warm. It was like watching a wolf transform into something almost tame, almost human. The tenderness in his eyes as he looked at his sister made Lena's chest ache with an emotion she refused to name. A memory flashed through her mind, Nico's hands, capable of such violence, carefully steadying her when she'd stumbled earlier that evening. The same gentleness she now witnessed with Sophia had been there in that brief touch, before his walls had slammed back into place. "Don't let it fool you," a gruff voice beside her warned. One of Nico's captains, Marco, she thought his name was, had noticed her staring. "The boss might love his sister, but that doesn't make him soft. I've seen him gut men who thought otherwise. Lena's jaw clenched, but she kept her expression neutral. She didn't need the reminder of what Nico was capable of. She'd seen the photos in police files, heard the whispered stories of his brutality. And yet, Sophia's presence seemed to peel back layers of Nico's carefully maintained facade. The way he listened intently to her, his protective stance, the genuine affection in his gestures, it all spoke of a depth she hadn't expected to find in someone like him. Their eyes met across the room, and Lena's breath caught in her throat. The softness vanished instantly, replaced by that familiar predatory intensity. Nico murmured something to Sophia before stalking toward Lena's seat, his movements fluid and dangerous. He braced his hands on the table behind her, caging her in without touching her. The heat of his body seeped through her dress, making her pulse quicken traitorously. "What were you thinking, huh?" His voice was low, meant only for her ears. "Think you can figure me out?" Lena refused to show how his proximity affected her, keeping her spine straight and her chin lifted. But then his hand brushed against her hip, the touch seemingly casual but deliberate. Electric awareness shot through her body, and she saw the knowing glint in his dark eyes. "You're not the only one with secrets, Lena." The marble floors echoed with each deliberate step as Nico strode into his study, dragging a man by the collar. Lena pressed herself against the wall, her heart hammering. She hadn't meant to witness this. She'd been exploring the mansion's west wing, searching for anything that might help her investigation. The man's pleading filled the room. "Please, Mr. Moretti, I can explain." "Explain?" Nico's voice cut through the air like ice. "Explain how you sold information to the Rossi family?" His massive hand wrapped around the traitor's throat. "How you put my people at risk." Lena's breath caught. She should run, should hide, but her feet remained rooted to the spot. This was the story she'd been chasing, the brutal reality of the Mafia world. But watching it unfold before her was different from writing about it from the safety of her desk. "Get Marco and Antonio in here," Nico commanded one of his men. His calm was terrifying, the kind of stillness that preceded a storm. Two more men entered, their faces grim. Lena recognized them from dinner the previous night. How easily they shifted from sharing jokes over pasta to this cold efficiency. "You know the price of betrayal." Nico's words weren't a threat. They were a simple statement of fact. He stepped back, adjusting his cufflinks with methodical precision. The traitor began sobbing, falling to his knees. "I have a family, and I have people who depend on me for protection." Nico's eyes flickered with something dark. "People who trust me to keep them safe from rats like you." Lena's fingers dug into the wall behind her. She wanted to look away, but journalism had taught her the importance of bearing witness. This was Nico, stripped of all pretense, the wolf in his true form. The sound of the gunshot made her flinch. It was quieter than in movies, somehow making it more real. The traitor crumpled to the floor, and Lena had to press her hand against her mouth to stifle a gasp. Nico turned, and their eyes met across the room. Of course he'd known she was there. Nothing escaped his notice. His expression remained unchanged as he walked toward her, his shoes leaving red prints on the marble. "You shouldn't be here," he said, but there was no anger in his voice, just that same terrible calm. Lena forced herself to stand straighter, even as her legs trembled. "I won't apologize for seeing the truth." "The truth?" His laugh was hollow. "You think this is truth? This is mercy, Lena. A quick death for a man who deserved worse." He moved closer, and she could smell copper and gunpowder on him. His hand reached out, and she flinched, but he only brushed a strand of hair from her face. The gesture was gentle, horrifyingly so, given what she'd just witnessed. "You write about violence," he continued, "but you've never really seen it, never understood why it's necessary." His thumb traced her jawline, leaving an invisible streak of red. "This is how I keep order, how I protect what's mine." Behind him, his men efficiently wrapped the body in plastic. The normality of their movements suggested this wasn't the first time, or the 100th. Lena forced herself to meet his gaze. "Is that supposed to frighten me?" "No." His eyes darkened as they bore into hers. He reached for a handkerchief, methodically wiping the blood from his hands. "You're scared of me now, but you should be more afraid of what I'll do to protect you." Lena's heels clicked against the marble floor as she followed Nico through the dimly lit hallway of his mansion. His broad shoulders were tense, his stride purposeful as he led her deeper into his domain. The air felt thick with unspoken tension. "Stay close," he ordered, his voice leaving no room for argument. "The Rossi family is making moves. I need to know where you are at all times." "I'm not your possession," Lena shot back, though she didn't slow her pace. "Or your pet." Nico stopped abruptly, turning to face her. His dark eyes blazed with intensity as he towered over her. "No, you're much more dangerous than that." The way he looked at her made her breath catch. His gaze dropped to her lips for a fraction of a second before he composed himself, jaw clenching as he turned away. They entered his study, where several of his men were gathered around a large desk covered in maps and documents. The conversation died as they walked in, all eyes turning to Lena. "Boss," one of them acknowledged, shooting Lena a suspicious look. "Should she be here for this?" "She stays," Nico said firmly, his hand coming to rest on the small of her back. The touch sent electricity through her spine. "Where I can see her." Lena wanted to protest, to maintain some semblance of independence, but the warmth of his hand was distracting. She found herself leaning into his touch despite her better judgment. The meeting dragged on, discussions of territory and rival families washing over her. But she couldn't focus on the words. Not with Nico's presence overwhelming her senses. His cologne, subtle but masculine, filled her nostrils. The heat of his body so close to hers made her skin tingle. When his men finally filed out, Lena remained rooted to the spot. Nico moved to his desk, loosening his tie as he settled into his chair. The silence between them was electric. "You should go to bed," he said, but his eyes told a different story. They raked over her figure, dark with want. Lena took a step toward him, drawn like a moth to flame. "Is that what you really want?" His fingers tightened on the arms of his chair. "What I want," he growled, "is dangerous for both of us." She moved closer still, her heart pounding. The attraction between them was undeniable, had been building for days. Every shared glance, every accidental touch had led to this moment. Lena reached out, her hand moving toward his face. She needed to touch him, to feel if his skin was as warm as it looked. But before her fingers could make contact, Nico's hand shot out, capturing her wrist. His grip was firm but gentle, thumb brushing over her pulse point. "Not yet, Lena," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "But soon." The grand ballroom of the Moretti estate sparkled with crystal chandeliers and polished marble, a stark contrast to the dangerous men who filled it. Lena smoothed down the midnight blue silk dress Nico had ordered for her, feeling exposed despite its modest cut. Her hip still ached from their first encounter, a constant reminder of how she'd ended up here. "Stop fidgeting," Nico murmured, his hand settling possessively on her lower back. "You'll draw attention." Lena shot him a sharp look. Isn't that the point of being your date? To draw attention away from whatever deal you're making tonight? A ghost of a smile played at his lips. Smart girl, but not too smart for your own good, I hope. His fingers traced small circles against her spine, sending unwanted shivers through her body. The room was filled with Italian mobsters and their glamorous wives, all pretending this was just another high society gathering. Lena recognized several faces from her investigative files, men who'd ordered hits, trafficked drugs, destroyed lives. Yet here they were, sipping champagne and laughing like ordinary businessmen. Dance with me, Nico commanded, though his tone was softer than usual. He didn't wait for her response, leading her onto the dance floor with practiced ease. His hand settled on her waist, pulling her closer than necessary. Lena's breath caught as their bodies aligned, the heat of him seeping through the thin silk of her dress. I hate this, she whispered, even as her body betrayed her by melting into his touch. No, you don't, he replied, his voice dark with promise. You hate that you don't hate it. They moved together seamlessly, as if they'd danced 1,000 times before. Lena tried to maintain her professional distance, to remember why she was really here. But Nico's presence was overwhelming. The spicy scent of his cologne, the strength in his hands, the way his eyes never left her face. It all combined to make her head spin. Your heart's racing, he observed, his thumb brushing against her pulse point. Are you afraid of me, Lena? No, she answered honestly. That was the problem. She should be terrified of this man who'd kidnapped her, who she'd watched kill without remorse. Instead, she felt something far more dangerous. A commotion near the entrance drew their attention. One of Nico's men approached swiftly, whispering something in his ear. Nico's expression hardened, his grip on Lena tightening imperceptibly. Come with me, he ordered, leading her away from the dance floor. Now. They wound through the crowd, Nico's hand firmly guiding her. Lena caught glimpses of armed men moving through the periphery of the ballroom, their movements purposeful and tense. Whatever was happening, it wasn't good. Nico steered her down a dimly lit corridor, away from the main event. The music faded to a distant hum as he checked each doorway they passed, finally pulling her into a secluded alcove. His body caged her against the wall, protective rather than threatening. What's going on? Lena demanded, her voice barely above a whisper. Shh, he breathed, one hand coming up to cup her face. His thumb traced her bottom lip, his eyes following the movement with predatory focus. You drive me crazy, you know that? Even now, with everything happening, I can't stop thinking about you. The intensity in his gaze made her knees weak. Lena knew she should push him away, maintain some semblance of professional distance, but her hands fisted in his expensive suit jacket instead. The heat between them was magnetic, drawing them closer with each passing second. Nico leaned in, his lips brushing against her ear. You want me just as much as I want you, don't you? You can't lie to me, Lena. The world around them disappeared as he pressed her against the wall. The gunshots shattered the evening calm, spraying glass across the restaurant's polished floor. Lena dove beneath the table, her heart hammering against her ribs as chaos erupted around her. Nico's reaction was instantaneous. One moment he was beside her, the next he had his gun drawn, barking orders to his men in rapid Italian. Stay down, he commanded, his eyes meeting hers for a split second before he turned to face the threat. The restaurant, once filled with the gentle clink of silverware and soft conversation, now echoed with screams and the thunder of gunfire. Through the chaos, Lena caught glimpses of men in dark suits exchanging fire, tables overturning and civilians scrambling for the exits. Nico moved like a predator, each movement calculated and lethal, He took down 2 attackers with precise shots, his face a mask of cold fury. Blood sprayed across the white tablecloth near Lena, and she stifled a gasp, pressing herself closer to the floor. "Get her out of here!" Nico shouted to one of his men, but before anyone could reach her, more attackers burst through the kitchen doors. The violence that followed made Lena's blood run cold. Nico's transformation was complete. Gone was any trace of the man who sometimes looked at her with softness in his eyes. In his place stood the wolf, brutal and merciless. He broke one man's neck with his bare hands, shot another, point blank in the face, and slammed a third into a marble pillar with bone-crushing force. Through it all, Lena couldn't look away. This was his world, raw, violent, and unforgiving. She watched as he interrogated the last surviving attacker, his voice deadly calm as he demanded answers. The man spat blood and cursed in Italian. Nico's response was swift and terrible. He pressed his gun under the man's chin. "Who sent you?" When the man remained silent, Nico pulled the trigger without hesitation. The silence that followed was deafening. Lena slowly rose from her hiding place, her legs shaking. The restaurant looked like a war zone. Broken glass, overturned furniture, and bodies scattered across the floor. The metallic scent of blood hung heavy in the air. Nico stood in the middle of it all, his expensive suit splattered with crimson, his chest heaving. When he turned to her, something flickered in his eyes, concern, fear, or perhaps both. He crossed the distance between them in long strides. His hands, still warm from the gun, reached for her face, checking for injuries. For the first time since she'd known him, those hands were trembling. "Are you hurt?" His voice was rough, urgent. Lena shook her head, unable to find her voice. She should have been terrified of him after what she'd just witnessed, but instead she found herself leaning into his touch. "This is what I am," he said, his fingers tangling in her hair. "This is what I do to protect what's mine." His other hand slid to her waist, pulling her closer. "This is my world, and you're in it now, whether you like it or not." The vulnerability in his voice made her breath catch. Here was the most dangerous man she'd ever known, showing her his darkest side and still reaching for her like she was his lifeline. Lena looked up into his eyes and saw the storm of emotions there, rage, fear, possession, and something deeper that made her heart race. In that moment, standing among the aftermath of violence with his blood-stained hands holding her like something precious, Lena realized she was falling for him. Not despite what he was, but because of all of him. The monster and the man, the violence and the vulnerability, the darkness and the unexpected light she sometimes glimpsed in his eyes. The golden light of sunset filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Nico's study, casting long shadows across the Persian rug. Lena sat in a leather armchair, watching as Nico poured 2 glasses of whiskey, his movements precise but tense. The events of the afternoon, the attempted hit, the bloodshed, still hung heavy in the air between them. "You want to know why I am who I am?" Nico's voice was quiet, dangerous. He handed her a glass, his fingers brushing against hers. "Why I don't hesitate to kill." Lena took the glass, studying the amber liquid. "Yes." Nico moved to the window, his broad shoulders rigid with tension. "Her name was Isabella." His words came out rough, as if they were being dragged from somewhere deep inside him. "My little sister." The pain in his voice made Lena's chest tighten. She watched as he pressed his forehead against the cool glass, his reflection fractured by the setting sun. She was 19. His knuckles went white around his glass. "Beautiful, innocent, everything I wasn't. I tried to keep her away from this life, but..." He took a long drink. Someone I trusted, someone close to our family, sold her out to our enemies. Lena set her untouched whiskey aside, her heart pounding. This was the story that had shaped him, turned him into the wolf. They took her. His voice cracked. Tortured her for information she didn't have. By the time I found her... He slammed his fist against the window, making the glass rattle. 3 days. They had her for 3 fucking days. Standing slowly, Lena approached him. The dangerous Mafia boss she'd come to know was crumbling before her eyes, revealing something raw and wounded beneath. I hunted them down, he continued, his voice dropping to a whisper. Every single one. Made them suffer like they made her suffer. But it didn't bring her back. Nothing could bring her back. He turned to face Lena, and the anguish in his eyes stole her breath. Gone was the cold calculation, the controlled violence. Here was a man haunted by loss, shaped by betrayal. That's when I learned. Trust gets you killed. Love makes you weak. The only way to survive in this world is to be feared. His gaze locked with hers. Until you. Lena's heart skipped. She could feel the heat radiating from his body, smell his expensive cologne mixed with gunpowder from earlier. You challenge me, he said, reaching out to trace her jawline with his finger. Push back when everyone else cowers. Look at me like I'm more than just a killer. His touch sent electricity through her skin. She should pull away, maintain the distance between them. But she couldn't move, caught in the gravity of his pain, his vulnerability. Today, when they came for me, his hand slid to cup her cheek. All I could think about was keeping you safe, and it terrified me, because the last time I cared about protecting someone... Understanding dawned on Lena. His controlling behavior, his obsession with keeping her close. It wasn't just about power. It was about fear. Fear of losing someone else. I'm not just the monster you see, Nico said, his voice raw with emotion. I'm the man who lost everything, and now I'm trying to protect the one thing I can't lose. His eyes pierced hers, and Lena knew that she was no longer just his prisoner. She was becoming something more. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Moretti Estate's garden room. Lena sat in a plush armchair, pretending to read a book, while secretly observing Nico with his family. The scene before her was so different from the blood and violence she'd witnessed in recent weeks that it felt almost surreal. Nico sat on the floor, his usually impeccable suit jacket discarded, sleeves rolled up to his elbows as he helped his young niece with a puzzle. His smile, genuine and warm, transformed his entire face. Gone was the cold, calculating mask of the Mafia boss. In its place was something softer, something human. Uncle Nico, this piece doesn't fit, the little girl complained, her dark curls bouncing as she shook her head in frustration. Patience, Piccola, Nico murmured, his voice gentler than Lena had ever heard it. Sometimes things that don't seem to fit at first find their place eventually. His eyes flickered briefly to Lena as he spoke, making her heart skip a beat. His sister-in-law, Maria, entered with a tray of cookies and milk, and Lena watched as Nico's niece scrambled into his lap, leaving the puzzle forgotten. The tenderness in his movements as he steadied the child made Lena's chest tight with unexpected emotion. "Cookie, Miss Lena?" the little girl called out, waving a chocolate chip cookie in her direction. Before Lena could respond, Nico was already rising, his niece still in his arms. He crossed the room with fluid grace, settling into the chair opposite Lena. The proximity made her pulse quicken, but she couldn't look away from the domestic scene before her. "Take it," Nico said softly, his dark eyes holding hers. "Sophia won't rest until you do." Lena accepted the cookie, her fingers brushing against the little girl's hand. Sophia beamed, then snuggled closer to her uncle, completely at ease in the arms of a man Lena had seen kill without hesitation just days before. "Tell the story about the wolf, Uncle Nico," Sophia demanded, and Lena watched in fascination as Nico's expression softened even further. "Again? You've heard it 100 times, Piccola." "Please?" The child's plea was accompanied by wide, innocent eyes that seemed to melt even the infamous wolf's resolve. As Nico began the tale, a story about a lone wolf protecting his pack from danger, Lena found herself drawn into his words. His voice took on a different quality, rich with emotion and warmth. She could see why they called him the Wolf. There was something primal about his protective nature, something fierce and untamable. The story wound down, and Sophia's eyes grew heavy. Maria appeared again, gathering her sleeping daughter from Nico's arms. The tenderness remained in his eyes as he watched them leave, and Lena felt something shift inside her. This was a side of Nico Moretti that few ever saw, the man beneath the monster, the protector beneath the killer. When they were alone, the air grew thick with tension. Nico's gaze turned to her, intense and searching. Gone was the gentle uncle, replaced by something more dangerous, more magnetic. He leaned forward, his presence filling her space. "Does it surprise you?" he asked, his voice low and intimate. "To see that I'm capable of love?" Lena swallowed hard, trying to maintain her composure. "I'm surprised by how well you hide it." "I hide nothing from you anymore, Lena." His words carried weight, heavy with meaning. "You've seen more of me than anyone outside my family. You know what that means?" She did know. In his world, knowledge was power, and power was dangerous. But it was more than that. He was letting her in, showing her parts of himself that made him vulnerable. Rising from his chair, Nico moved closer, his presence overwhelming. His hand came up to cup her face, thumb brushing across her cheekbone in a gesture that was both possessive and tender. His eyes, usually so cold, burned with intensity as he held her gaze. "You'll never leave this world," he said, his voice thick with promise and threat. "And you'll never leave me, Lena. Not now. Not ever." Lena's fingers trembled as she stared at the document on her laptop screen. The numbers, dates, and names blurred together, but their significance was crystal clear. This wasn't just another piece of evidence. It was the skeleton key that could unlock every dark secret in Nico's empire. Her throat tightened as she scrolled through the encrypted files. Wire transfers, shell companies, political bribes, everything was here. One anonymous tip to the FBI, and Nico's carefully constructed world would crumble. The luxurious guest room suddenly felt suffocating. Outside her window, Nico's men patrolled the grounds, their dark figures moving like shadows against the setting sun. She was a prisoner in a golden cage, but lately the bars had started to feel less like a prison and more like protection. She thought about the Nico she'd seen earlier that day, the man who'd spent hours playing with his young niece in the garden, who'd laughed genuinely when the little girl crowned him with flowers. The tenderness in his eyes had been real, just like the gentle way he'd touched Lena's shoulder when he passed her in the hallway. But she couldn't forget the other Nico, the one who'd ordered executions without blinking, who'd threatened to destroy anyone who crossed him. The man whose dark eyes could turn from warm to deadly in seconds. Her laptop screen flickered, reminding her of the weight of what she'd discovered. This wasn't just about Nico anymore. The documents implicated dozens of people, including high-ranking politicians and law enforcement officials. The ripple effect would be catastrophic. A knock at her door made her jump. She slammed the laptop shut, her heart pounding against her ribs. "Come in," she called, trying to keep her voice steady. Nico stepped into the room, and the air instantly changed, charged with that familiar tension that always sparked between them. He wore his usual pristine suit, but his tie was loosened, a rare sign of relaxation. His dark eyes swept over her, catching on her tense posture. "You missed dinner," he said, his voice deceptively soft. He moved closer, and Lena fought the urge to step back. "That's not like you." "I was working," she replied, gesturing vaguely at her laptop. "Lost track of time." He hummed, a low sound that sent shivers down her spine. "Working on what exactly?" Lena met his gaze, forcing herself to stay calm. "Just following up on some leads. Nothing concrete yet." Nico's expression hardened, the warmth from earlier vanishing like smoke. He crossed the room in 3 long strides, invading her personal space. "Don't lie to me, Lena. I can see it in your eyes. You're hiding something." She lifted her chin, refusing to be intimidated despite the fear coursing through her veins. "I'm a journalist, Nico. Everything I do involves uncovering secrets." His hand shot out, gripping her chin. Not hard enough to hurt, but firm enough to force her to maintain eye contact. "And I'm the man who owns this territory, including every secret in it." His thumb brushed across her lower lip, the gesture both threatening and intimate. "Tell me what you know, or I'll make you regret it." Lena jerked away from his touch, anger flaring hot in her chest. "You won't intimidate me," she said, even as her heart raced with terror at what he might do if he discovered the truth. The cold metal of the gun pressed against Lena's temple, and Damian Rossi's laugh echoed through the warehouse. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she watched Nico's face transform from calculated control to pure rage. "Let her go, Rossi." Nico's voice was deadly quiet, his hand hovering near his concealed weapon. The great Wolf Moretti, brought to his knees by a simple journalist. Damian's grip tightened on Lena's arm, making her wince. Who would have thought? The warehouse air felt thick with tension. Lena could smell motor oil and damp concrete, mixed with the metallic scent of blood from Nico's men who lay unconscious, or worse, on the ground. This wasn't supposed to happen. She'd only stepped out for a moment, trying to clear her head after discovering information that could destroy Nico's empire. "You're making a mistake," Nico said, his eyes never leaving Lena's. There was something in his gaze, something beyond the fury and calculation. Was it fear? Damian yanked her closer, his breath hot against her ear. "Oh, I don't think so. You see, I've been watching how the mighty wolf circles his pretty little prey. But you got sloppy, Moretti. Let your guard down." Lena's mind raced. She'd seen Nico kill without hesitation, had witnessed his brutality firsthand. But now, with a gun to her head, he seemed almost careful, restrained, like a caged animal searching for an opening. "If you want to negotiate," Nico's voice remained steady, "we can do that, but she stays out of it." "Negotiate?" Damian laughed again, the sound making Lena's skin crawl. "I'm not here to negotiate. I'm here to take everything from you, starting with her." The warehouse doors burst open, and more of Damian's men flooded in, surrounding them. Lena could see Nico's jaw clench, his fingers flexing near his weapon. She knew that look, had seen it right before he'd ordered executions, right before he'd shown her exactly what kind of monster he could be. But this time was different. This time, she was the variable that changed everything. "Last chance, Rossi," Nico growled. Damian's response was to press the gun harder against Lena's temple. She couldn't help the small gasp that escaped her lips, and something in Nico's eyes flickered. What happened next was a blur of violence and precision. Nico moved with inhuman speed, and suddenly the warehouse erupted in gunfire. Lena felt herself being yanked backward, then thrown to the ground. A heavy body covered hers, Nico's, shielding her from the chaos. She could feel his heart pounding against her back, his breath hot on her neck. "When I move," he whispered, "run for the back door, don't stop." Before she could respond, he was up, firing with deadly accuracy. Lena scrambled to her feet and ran, the sound of gunfire and shouts following her. She could hear Damien cursing, could hear the thud of bodies hitting concrete. She made it to the door, pushing through into the cold night air. Strong hands grabbed her immediately, and she started to fight until she recognized one of Nico's most trusted men. "Get her to the safe house," Nico's voice commanded from behind her. She turned to see him emerging from the warehouse, blood splattered across his expensive suit. His eyes were wild, dangerous, but when they met hers, something softened. In the car, speeding through the city streets, Lena's mind raced. Nico had saved her, had put himself between her and certain death. The same man who'd imprisoned her, who'd shown her the darkest parts of his world, had just risked everything to protect her. She touched her temple where the gun had been pressed, remembering the look in Nico's eyes. He'd been willing to negotiate, something she'd never seen him do before. He'd shown restraint when she knew he was capable of so much worse. The safe house was a luxury penthouse with bulletproof windows and armed guards. As she stood in the living room, watching the city lights below, she heard Nico enter. His footsteps were heavy, tired. "Why?" she asked without turning around. "Why risk everything for me?" His silence made her turn, and what she saw in his face made her breath catch. There was blood on his cheek. His suit was ruined, but his eyes held something she'd never seen before. "Because you're mine," he said simply, but the words carried weight. "And I protect what's mine." The file lay open on Lena's desk, its contents spilled across the polished surface like an accusation. Her hands trembled as she read the documents again, hoping desperately that she'd misunderstood. But the evidence was undeniable. Bank transfers, coded messages, meeting schedules. All of it pointing to one devastating truth. Her father had orchestrated the betrayal that led to the death of Nico's sister. Her stomach churned as she pieced it together. The political gains her father had made in the aftermath, the sudden shift in power within the criminal underworld. It all made sense now. He'd sacrificed an innocent woman for his own advancement. The worst part was that she'd seen the signs. Little things that hadn't added up over the years. Conversations that had ended too abruptly when she entered the room. The way her father would tense up at any mention of the Moretti family. She'd dismissed it all. Trusted in the image of the righteous man she'd believed him to be. Footsteps echoed in the hallway outside her room. Lena's heart raced as she gathered the papers, shoving them into a drawer. She couldn't let Nico find out. Not yet. Not until she figured out what to do. The door opened, and one of Nico's men appeared. "Boss wants to see you." Lena nodded, forcing her features into a mask of calm. As she followed the guard through the mansion's corridors, her mind raced. Every step felt like walking on broken glass. The truth burned in her chest, threatening to burst out. When they reached Nico's office, she found him standing by the window, his broad shoulders tense beneath his tailored suit. He turned slowly, and the look in his eyes made her blood run cold. Something was wrong. "Interesting thing happened today," he said, his voice deceptively soft. "One of my men intercepted some very enlightening information about your father." Lena's heart stopped. She fought to keep her expression neutral, but her hands were trembling. "What kind of information?" Nico moved closer, each step deliberate. The kind that explains exactly how my sister ended up dead. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folder, identical to the one she'd just hidden in her room. Care to explain why you've been protecting him? I wasn't... The words died in her throat as Nico's expression darkened. Don't lie to me. His voice cracked like a whip. You've been investigating this for weeks. Did you think I wouldn't know? That I wouldn't have people watching your every move? The truth hit her like a physical blow. He'd known. All along, he'd been watching, waiting to see what she would do with the information. This wasn't just about her father's betrayal. It was about hers, too. Nico, please. She stepped forward, reaching for him, but he jerked away. Your father's the one who set me up. His words were laced with venom. You knew, didn't you? You knew all along. The accusation hung in the air between them, heavy with betrayal and unspoken pain. Lena felt the ground crumbling beneath her feet. Everything she thought she knew about her life, her father, herself, all of it falling away into darkness. She stood there, caught between the man she was falling for and the father who had raised her, knowing that no matter what she chose, someone would end up destroyed. The weight of it all pressed down on her chest until she could barely breathe. The morning light filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Nico's study, casting long shadows across Lena's face as she stared at the documents spread before her. Her hands trembled as she read through the evidence again and again, hoping desperately that she'd misunderstood. But the truth was there in black and white, her father's signature on papers that had sealed the fate of Nico's sister years ago. Her stomach churned as she picked up another document, this one detailing the political favors her father had received in exchange for his betrayal. The dates, the names, the cold calculations, it all lined up perfectly. Her father, the man who'd raised her to fight for justice, had sold an innocent woman to her death for political gain. Find something interesting? Nico's voice cut through the silence like a blade. Lena's head snapped up. He stood in the doorway, his broad frame blocking any escape. His face was a mask of controlled fury, but his eyes... God, his eyes burned with an intensity that made her blood run cold. How long have you known? She whispered, her voice barely audible. Nico moved into the room with predatory grace, each step measured and deliberate. About your father? I've had my suspicions. But seeing you here, going through these files... He stopped at the edge of the desk. Tell me, Lena, how long have you been protecting him? I didn't know, she said, rising from her chair. I swear to God, Nico, I didn't know. His laugh was bitter, devoid of warmth. You're a journalist, Kara, the best at what you do. You expect me to believe you never connected the dots? The room felt smaller suddenly, the air heavy with tension. Outside, the sound of cars and distant voices filtered through the windows, normal sounds that seemed surreal against the darkness of this moment. I've spent weeks here, under your control, fighting my feelings for you, Lena said, her voice growing stronger. Do you think I would have let myself fall for you if I'd known my father was responsible for your sister's death? Nico moved around the desk, closing the distance between them. His hand shot out, gripping her chin, forcing her to meet his gaze. Your feelings? He growled. You think that matters now? Your father's betrayal destroyed my family, and you... His grip tightened. You've been here, in my home, in my bed, while carrying his secret. It wasn't my secret to carry. Lena pushed against his chest, but he didn't budge. I found out the same way you did, through these documents. My own father. Her voice broke. He lied to me too. For a moment, something flickered in Nico's eyes, a flash of understanding, maybe even sympathy. but it vanished as quickly as it appeared, replaced by cold calculation. "Your father's actions have consequences," he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "And now, so do yours." "What are you going to do?" Lena asked, though part of her didn't want to know the answer. Nico released her chin, but his presence still caged her against the desk. "What I should have done weeks ago. Your father will pay for what he did to my sister. And you—" He traced a finger along her jaw, the gentle touch at odds with the threat in his words. "You'll watch as I tear his world apart." "Nico, please!" "Don't." His voice cracked like a whip. "Don't beg for his life, not after what he did." Lena felt tears burning in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "Then what was all this?" she demanded. "These past weeks, everything between us, was it just part of your revenge?" The muscle in Nico's jaw ticked. "You want to talk about revenge? Your father sacrificed my sister for his ambition. He watched her die and said nothing. For years, I've lived with that pain, that rage. And now you have me," Lena finished, her voice hollow. "The perfect weapon against him." The air crackled with tension as they faced each other, months of passion and secrets colliding in this moment. Nico's empire was fracturing, the loyalty of his men tested by this revelation. And Lena stood at the center of it all, torn between the father who'd betrayed her trust and the man who'd captured her heart. "I've protected you, Lena," Nico said, his words heavy with finality. "But you've pushed me too far." The smell of gunpowder hung thick in the air as Lena pressed herself against the wall, her heart hammering against her ribs. The sound of shattering glass and rapid gunfire echoed through Nico's mansion. She could hear his men shouting orders, their heavy boots thundering across marble floors. Blood stained the expensive Persian rug beside her. Not hers, but from one of Nico's guards who'd taken a bullet meant for his boss. The man's vacant eyes stared at nothing now, a stark reminder of how quickly death came in Nico's world. "Get down!" Nico's voice cut through the chaos as he grabbed her, forcing her behind an overturned mahogany desk. His body covered hers, warm and solid, smelling of leather and gun smoke. His breath came in controlled bursts against her neck, sending involuntary shivers down her spine despite the danger. "Stay here," he ordered, his voice low and deadly. "Don't move unless I tell you to." Before she could protest, he was gone, moving like a predator through the shadows of his office. The way he handled his weapon, the cold calculation in his eyes. This was the wolf in his element. Lena watched as he took down 2 attackers with precise shots, never hesitating, never flinching. The violence should have repulsed her. Instead, she found herself mesmerized by his lethal grace, the raw power he commanded. This was the man who'd imprisoned her, threatened her, and yet now shielded her with his own body from harm. A flash of movement caught her eye. Another attacker emerging from behind a curtain, gun aimed at Nico's back. Without thinking, Lena shouted, "Behind you!" Nico spun, eliminating the threat with a single shot. His eyes met hers across the room, dark with an intensity that made her breath catch. In that moment, she realized she'd chosen a side. She'd chosen him. The firefight continued around them, but Nico kept circling back to her position, checking on her between exchanges of gunfire. His protectiveness was suffocating yet thrilling, making her pulse race for reasons that had nothing to do with fear. "You're bleeding," she noticed when he crouched beside her again, reaching for his arm where a bullet had grazed him. He caught her wrist before she could touch him, his grip firm, but not painful. "Worried about me, sweetheart?" Despite the situation, his lips curved into that dangerous smile that made her stomach flip. "You're no good to me dead," she shot back, trying to maintain some semblance of defiance. His eyes darkened. "I'm not dying today, and neither are you." He pulled her closer, his voice dropping to a growl. "Nobody takes what's mine." The possessiveness in his tone should have angered her. Instead, heat pooled in her belly, and she found herself leaning into him, drawn to his dangerous magnetism like a moth to flame. His free hand cupped her face, thumb brushing across her cheekbone with surprising gentleness. The contrast was dizzying, his tender touch amid the violence surrounding them, the way he could switch from ruthless killer to gentle protector in a heartbeat. It was intoxicating and terrifying all at once. More gunshots rang out, shattering their moment. Nico's expression hardened as he pulled away, transforming back into the merciless Mafia boss. "Time to end this," he said, his voice cold enough to freeze hell itself. Lena watched him move through his territory like an avenging angel, dealing death with precise efficiency. Each shot, each calculated move, reminded her that she was falling for a man who lived and breathed violence, a man who would kill without hesitation to protect what he considered his. And somehow, against all reason, against everything she'd ever believed about herself, she'd become one of those things he would kill to protect. The realization should have terrified her more than it did. The night exploded in gunfire. Glass shattered across the warehouse floor as Nico's men stormed through the windows. Lena pressed herself against a cold metal container, her heart thundering in her chest. Through the chaos, she couldn't tear her eyes away from Nako. He moved like a predator, precise and lethal. His dark suit was splattered with crimson as he dispatched Damien's men one by one. There was no hesitation in his movements, no mercy in his eyes. This was the wolf everyone feared, the monster beneath the man she'd grown to love. "You thought you could take what's mine?" Nico's voice boomed through the warehouse as he approached Damien, who was now cornered and bleeding. "You thought you could threaten her?" Lena's breath caught in her throat. The raw possession in his voice made her shiver. This was all for her, the violence, the bloodshed, the vengeance. Nico had unleashed hell because someone had dared to threaten her. Damien spat blood. "She's your weakness, Wolf. Everyone can see it." "No." Nico's smile was terrifying. "She's my strength." The gunshot that followed echoed through the warehouse. Damien's body crumpled to the floor, and silence fell like a heavy curtain. Lena could hear her own rapid breathing, feel her pulse racing beneath her skin. The air was thick with gunpowder and blood. Nico turned toward her, his eyes finding hers across the carnage. His white shirt was stained red, his face spattered with his enemy's blood. He should have looked horrifying. He did look horrifying. But Lena couldn't look away. He crossed the distance between them in long strides, his shoes leaving bloody footprints on the concrete floor. When he reached her, his hands cupped her face, surprisingly gentle for someone who had just orchestrated such violence. "Are you hurt?" His voice was rough, urgent. His thumbs stroked her cheeks as his eyes searched her face. Lena shook her head, unable to form words. She should be terrified. She should be running. Instead, she found herself leaning into his touch, craving the safety of his embrace even as the evidence of his brutality surrounded them. "I told you what I'd do to protect you," he murmured, his forehead pressing against hers. "I told you there was no line I wouldn't cross." His lips brushed against hers, soft at first, then demanding. Lena could taste blood and gunpowder, could feel the tremor of adrenaline still coursing through his body. She kissed him back with equal fervor, her fingers gripping his blood-stained shirt. When they broke apart, Nico's eyes were dark with possession. He wrapped an arm around her waist, pulling her closer, shielding her from the sight of death that surrounded them. His other hand tangled in her hair, forcing her to meet his gaze. You see now? He asked, his voice low and dangerous. You see what I am? What I'll do for you? Lena nodded, her throat tight with emotion. I see you, Nico, all of you. His grip tightened, almost painful in its intensity. And you're still here? It wasn't a question, but Lena answered anyway. I'm still here. Around them, Nico's men were already cleaning up, disposing of bodies and evidence with practiced efficiency. But Nico didn't move, didn't loosen his hold on her. He kept her pressed against him, his heartbeat strong and steady against her chest. Mine, he growled, his lips brushing against her ear. His hand splayed possessively across her lower back. You're mine. In that moment, surrounded by death and darkness, Lena surrendered to the truth she'd been fighting for so long. She belonged to him, to this dangerous man who killed without mercy, but touched her with such tenderness. There was no going back, no escaping this world she'd fallen into. Nico pulled back just enough to look into her eyes. You're mine, he repeated, his voice rough with emotion. Forever. The warehouse air hung thick with gun smoke and tension. Blood pooled on the concrete floor, reflecting the harsh fluorescent lights above. Nico stood in the center of the carnage, his suit jacket discarded, white shirt stained crimson. His eyes burned with a cold fury as he faced Damian Rossi. You should have known better than to touch what's mine, Nico's voice carried across the empty space, deadly calm despite the rage coursing through him. Damian laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the walls. The great Nico Moretti, brought to his knees by a simple journalist. He kept his gun trained on Nico, circling slowly. How the mighty have fallen. Bodies of Damian's men littered the ground around them, a testament to Nico's ruthlessness. The air reeked of copper and gunpowder, a familiar scent that usually brought Nico comfort. But not tonight. Tonight, all he could think about was Lena, bound and gagged in the corner, her eyes wide with fear, and something else, determination. Last chance, Rossi. Nico's fingers tightened on his weapon. Surrender now and I'll make it quick. You've gone soft, Damian spat, his perfectly tailored suit now wrinkled and blood-spattered. The wolf I knew wouldn't have hesitated. He wouldn't have let a woman make him weak. Nico's jaw clenched. You're right about one thing, he said, taking a measured step forward. I wouldn't have hesitated. The gunshot cracked through the air like thunder. Damian staggered, red blooming across his chest. His face registered shock before another shot rang out, catching him in the shoulder. He crashed to his knees, gun clattering across the concrete. Nico moved with predatory grace, closing the distance between them. His footsteps echoed in the sudden silence. You never understood, Damian, he said, standing over his fallen enemy. Love doesn't make you weak. It gives you something worth dying for. Damian tried to laugh, but it came out as a wet cough. And what? What will you do now? Your own family? They've turned against you, all for her. I'll rebuild, Nico said simply. He pressed the barrel of his gun to Damian's forehead. But you won't be around to see it. The final shot seemed almost anticlimactic. Damian's body slumped to the ground, joining the others who had dared to challenge the wolf. Nico stood motionless for a moment, letting the weight of what he'd done settle over him. His empire was in shambles. His most trusted lieutenants had sided with Damian, believing Nico's attachment to Lena had made him vulnerable. They'd been right, in a way. She was his weakness, but she was also his strength. Nico turned to where Lena was bound, his movements mechanical as exhaustion began to set in. Blood dripped from a cut above his eye, and his ribs screamed in protest with each step. The fight had taken more out of him than he cared to admit. He knelt beside her, carefully removing the gag. His hands shook slightly as he untied her bonds, checking her for injuries. She had a bruise blooming on, her cheek where one of Damien's men had struck her, and the sight made fresh anger surge through him. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. Lena shook her head, her eyes never leaving his face. She took in the blood, the bruises, the raw devastation in his expression. "Nico," she whispered. He pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. The scent of her perfume cut through the metallic tang of blood, grounding him. His kingdom was crumbling around him. His family had betrayed him. Everything he'd built over the years lay in ruins at his feet. But he had her. She was alive, safe in his arms. And for now, that was enough. They stayed like that, surrounded by death and destruction, clinging to each other in the aftermath of violence. The weight of everything they'd lost, and everything they still stood to lose, pressed down on them like a physical thing. The morning light filtered through the bulletproof windows of Nico's study, casting long shadows across his face as he stood before the elaborate evidence board. Photos, documents, and red strings connected everything back to one man, Senator Marcus Alvarez, Lena's father. His fingers traced the connection lines, jaw clenched with barely contained fury. Lena watched from the doorway, her heart heavy. The past week's revelations had shattered her world. Evidence of her father's involvement in Maria Moretti's death was undeniable. Bank transfers, encrypted messages, meetings with known hitmen. It all led back to him. "He has to pay." Nico's voice cut through the silence, deep and dangerous. "Your father signed my sister's death warrant for his political gain." Lena stepped into the room, her hip still tender from her earlier fall. "I know," she whispered, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. "But Nico—" He turned to face her, his dark eyes blazing with controlled rage. "Don't ask me to spare him, Lena, not after what he did." The weight of their shared pain hung heavy between them. Lena understood Nico's need for vengeance. She'd seen how Maria's death had shaped him, turned him into the ruthless man who now commanded respect and fear in equal measure. "I want to face him first," she said, squaring her shoulders. "I need to hear it from him." Nico crossed the room in 3 long strides, his hands coming to rest on her shoulders. "You think he'll tell you the truth? Men like your father, they'll lie until their last breath." "Maybe." Lena met his gaze steadily. "But I'm his daughter. If anyone can make him talk, it's me." A muscle ticked in Nico's jaw as he considered her words. His thumb traced along her collarbone, a gesture both possessive and tender. "You're not going alone." "I wouldn't expect anything less," she replied, trying to ignore how her body responded to his touch. Within the hour, they were en route to her father's estate, the familiar streets of her childhood taking on a sinister new meaning. Nico's men had secured the perimeter, ensuring the senator couldn't escape what was coming. Marcus Alvarez sat in his study, looking every bit the distinguished politician he portrayed to the world. But Lena saw him differently now, saw the calculated coldness behind his practiced smile, the way his eyes darted to the armed men flanking Nico. "I suppose this isn't a social call," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the tension in the room. Lena stepped forward, her heart pounding. "Tell me about Maria Moretti." Her father's face remained impassive, but she caught the slight twitch of his fingers, a tell she'd learned to recognize during their countless political discussions. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't lie to me," Lena's voice cracked with emotion. "We have proof. Bank transfers, meetings, everything. You sold her out to Rossi's men, your own goddaughter, Papa. How could you?" Marcus's facade cracked slightly, age lines deepening around his eyes. Politics is a dangerous game, Lena. Sometimes sacrifices must be made for the greater good. Greater good? Nico's voice was deadly quiet. He moved like a predator, circling Marcus's desk. My sister was 19. She had her whole life ahead of her. She knew too much, Marcus replied, his mask slipping to reveal the cold calculation beneath. She was going to expose everything. I couldn't let that happen. Lena felt sick. The father she'd known, or thought she'd known, was disappearing before her eyes, replaced by a stranger capable of ordering a young woman's death to protect his political ambitions. You were like a father to her, Nico growled, his control slipping. She trusted you. Trust is a luxury in our world, Marcus said, his eyes meeting Lena's. Surely you understand that now, daughter. Look at where you're standing, beside the very man you were investigating. We all make compromises. Lena stepped closer to Nico, her decision made. No, Papa. What you did wasn't a compromise. It was murder, and now you have to face the consequences. The morning sun filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Nico's study, casting long shadows across the Persian rug. Lena stood by the window, her fingers tracing invisible patterns on the cool glass. Behind her, Nico sat in his leather chair, his presence as commanding as ever. But there was something different about him now, a softness in his eyes when he looked at her. You're thinking too loud, he said, breaking the silence. Lena turned to face him, taking in his appearance. The bruises from his fight with Rossi were starting to fade, but the cut above his eyebrow would leave another scar. Another mark of the violent world he inhabited, the world she now called her own. I can't help it, she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. Everything's changed. Nico rose from his chair, moving toward her with the fluid grace of a predator. But his touch, when he reached for her, was gentle. His fingers brushed against her hip. The same hip he'd inadvertently injured what felt like a lifetime ago. Does it still hurt? He asked, his voice rough with emotion. Lena shook her head, leaning into his touch. No, not anymore. The physical pain had long since faded, but the memory of that first encounter remained crystal clear. How she'd feared him then, how she'd hated him. Now those feelings had transformed into something else entirely, something that terrified her even more than his initial violence had. I never meant to hurt you, Nico said, his hand sliding up to cup her face. Not then, not ever. I know. And she did know. Despite everything, the blood, the violence, the deaths that seemed to follow in his wake, Nico had always protected her. Even when she'd discovered her father's betrayal, even when she'd pushed him away, he'd never stopped watching over her. Nico's thumb traced her bottom lip, his eyes darkening with desire. You've changed me, Lena. Made me feel things I thought died with my sister. She caught his hand in hers, pressing it against her heart. You've changed me too. I used to see everything in black and white, right and wrong, good and evil. She met his gaze steadily. Now I know better. His other hand tangled in her hair, pulling her closer. And what do you see now? I see you, she whispered. All of you. The monster and the man, the killer and the protector. She pressed herself against him, feeling the solid warmth of his body. And I choose both. A growl rumbled in his chest, and his grip tightened possessively. After everything you've seen? Everything I've done? Because of everything I've seen, she corrected him. Because I understand now. Your world isn't pretty or clean or safe, but it's real. And so is this. Us. Nico's eyes blazed with an intensity that made her breath catch. She could see the battle within him, the need to possess her warring with his desire to protect her from himself. But Lena was done running, done fighting what they had become to each other. She rose on her tiptoes, pressing her lips to the scar on his jaw. I'm not afraid anymore, Nico. Not of you, not of this life. His control snapped. In one fluid motion, he had her pressed against the window, his body caging her in. The heat of him seeped through her clothes, making her shiver despite the warmth of the morning sun. You should be, he growled. I'm not a good man, Lena. I never will be. I don't want a good man, she said, her hands sliding up his chest. I want you. A shudder ran through his powerful frame. His forehead pressed against hers, their breaths mingling in the space between them. When he spoke again, his voice was raw with emotion. You're mine, Nico whispered, as he pulled her into his embrace. And I'm never letting you go. The silver moonlight spilled through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Nico's penthouse, casting long shadows across the marble floors. Lena stood at the window, her fingers pressed against the cool glass, watching the city lights twinkle below. The same city that had once been her battlefield, where she'd hunted stories and chased truth, now felt different. Changed. Like her. Her hip still ached sometimes, a reminder of that first violent encounter with Nico. But now, the pain felt more like a bookmark in her story. The moment everything changed. She heard his footsteps before she felt his presence, that familiar electricity crackling in the air between them. Still planning your escape? Nico's voice was low, tinged with dark humor. He moved behind her, close enough that she could feel his warmth, but not quite touching. Lena's lips curved into a slight smile. Would you let me if I tried? Never. His hand settled on her hips, gentle despite the possessiveness in his tone. But you already know that. She turned in his arms, studying his face. The hardness was still there, the ruthlessness that made him feared throughout the city. But there was something else too, something only she got to see. A softness in his eyes when he looked at her, a tenderness in his touch that belied his brutal nature. I used to think I was your prisoner, Lena said, reaching up to trace the scar along his jaw, a reminder of the battle with Rossi that had nearly taken him from her. But that's not true anymore, is it? Nico's grip tightened slightly. You were never just a prisoner, Lena. From the moment you challenged me, looked me in the eye when everyone else cowered, you were more. The memory of those early days rushed back. The fear, the defiance, the undeniable pull between them that she'd fought so hard against. I hated you then, she admitted. I know. His thumb brushed across her bottom lip. I wanted you to hate me. Hate was safer than what I really felt for you. Lena's heart thundered in her chest. Even now, after everything they'd been through, his intensity could steal her breath. And what was that? Obsession. His voice dropped lower. Need. The kind that burns everything else away until there's nothing left but ashes. He cupped her face in his hands. You changed everything, Lena. Made me question who I was, what I wanted. She understood that feeling all too well. Her old life, her principles, her black and white view of the world. All of it had crumbled in the face of loving him. We destroyed each other's worlds, she whispered. No. Nico's eyes darkened. We built a new one, together. His words settled deep in her chest, true in a way she couldn't deny. The woman she'd been, the crusading journalist determined to expose the truth at any cost, would never have imagined finding peace in the arms of a man like Nico. But here she was, standing in his embrace, feeling more at home than she ever had before. Your world is still dangerous, she said, not as an accusation but as a simple truth. It is. He didn't try to deny it. But you're not afraid anymore, are you? Lena shook her head. Fear had long since given way to something else, understanding, acceptance, love. She knew who Nico was, what he was capable of. She'd seen his brutality firsthand, witnessed the cold calculation that made him such a feared leader. But she'd also seen his loyalty, his fierce protection of those he considered his own. "No," she answered finally. "I'm not afraid. Not of you. Not of this life." His expression softened, just slightly. "Good." He pulled her closer, one hand sliding into her hair. "Because you're mine now, Lena. Part of my world. Part of me." She leaned into his touch, feeling the strength in his hands, the barely contained power in his body. This was who they were now. Not captor and captive, not predator and prey, but equals in their own dangerous dance. "I know," she whispered against his skin. "I'm exactly where I want to be." The morning sun filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Nico's penthouse office, casting long shadows across the marble floor. Lena stood by the window, watching the city below come to life. The past few months had changed everything: her world, her beliefs, and most importantly, herself. Behind her she heard the familiar sound of Nico's footsteps. Heavy, purposeful, commanding. She didn't turn around, but her body responded to his presence, tension coiling in her muscles. "You're up early," he said, his voice still rough from sleep. The sound sent a shiver down her spine. "Couldn't sleep," Lena admitted, finally turning to face him. Nico stood there in his tailored black suit, every inch the powerful Mafia boss she'd first met. But now she saw beyond that carefully crafted exterior. She saw the man who held her through nightmares, who whispered secrets in the dark, who killed to keep her safe. Second thoughts? His eyes narrowed slightly, that predatory gleam she'd come to know so well flickering in their depths. Lena moved toward him, her heels clicking against the floor. "No, just thinking about how different everything is now." His large hand caught her waist, pulling her closer. "Different good or different bad?" "Different everything," she said, placing her palm against his chest. Through the expensive fabric of his suit, she could feel his heart beating, steady and strong. "A year ago I was hunting you. Now you're mine," he finished, his grip tightening possessively. The word "mine" no longer frightened her the way it once had. It had become a comfort, a promise, a declaration of protection and possession that made her feel safer than she'd ever felt before. "The other families are falling in line," Nico continued, his thumb tracing circles on her hip. "After what happened to Rossi, no one dares challenge us openly anymore." Lena thought about the bloody path that had led them here. The betrayals, the violence, the deaths, including her own father's downfall. She'd learned to live with it all, had found her place in this dangerous world. "And what about the newspaper?" she asked, thinking of her former career, the life she'd left behind. Nico's lips curved into a dangerous smile. "It's yours if you want it. Everything I own is yours now, Lena. My empire, my protection, my life." The weight of his words settled over her. She wasn't just the woman who loved him. She was becoming something more. A queen to his king, a partner in his dark empire. "The other families won't like that," she said, thinking of the old-school Mafia bosses who still saw women as possessions rather than equals. "They don't have to like it." His voice dropped lower, that dangerous edge she'd first feared now sending heat through her veins. "They just have to accept it, or they'll end up like Rossi." Lena reached up, tracing the scar on his jaw, a reminder of their violent past. "And what if I don't want to be your queen?" His eyes darkened, and his grip became almost painful. "You already are. You sealed your fate the moment you chose to stay." She had chosen this. Chosen him. Chosen this life with all its darkness and danger and devastating beauty. The realization should have terrified her, but instead, it filled her with a strange sense of peace. "The meeting with the 5 families is tonight," Nico said, his fingers tangling in her hair. "They need to see us united, strong." "They will," Lena promised, understanding what he needed from her. She wasn't just his lover anymore, she was his partner, his equal, the woman who would stand beside him as he ruled his empire. Nico pulled her closer, his breath hot against her ear. "You're not afraid anymore." It wasn't a question, but she answered anyway. "No, not of you, not of this life." His grip tightened, possessive and protective all at once. "Good, because this is who we are now. What we are." Lena lifted her chin, meeting his intense gaze. The man who had once been her captor, her enemy, her darkest fear had become her everything. His kiss was fierce and possessive, sealing their future together. "You're mine, Lena. Forever." The city lights flickered to life as dusk settled over the streets of Manhattan. Lena's heels clicked against the pavement, her hand securely wrapped in Nico's larger one, as they walked together. His presence beside her was both a comfort and a reminder of everything that had changed. The same streets she once prowled for stories now belonged to him. To them. Nico's thumb traced lazy circles on her palm as they passed storefronts that paid him protection money and restaurants where deals were made in back rooms. His territory, his empire, and now hers too. "Still getting used to it?" Nico's voice was low, meant only for her ears. His dark eyes studied her face, reading every micro-expression like he always did. Lena squeezed his hand. "It's different, seeing the city through your eyes now." She paused at a corner, watching a shop owner hurriedly bow his head in deference as they passed. "Before, I was always looking for the darkness, the corruption. Now you're part of it," Nico finished, pulling her closer to his side. His warmth seeped through her coat, a stark contrast to the cool evening air. "I'm part of you," she corrected, meeting his gaze. "The corruption, the power, the protection, it's all just part of who you are, who we are now." A ghost of a smile crossed Nico's face, the kind only she got to see. Around them, people gave them a wide berth, eyes averted. Everyone knew who he was, the wolf, the man who ruled the city's underworld with an iron fist. But only Lena knew the man beneath the monster, the one who held her at night, and whispered promises against her skin. They stopped at a small cafe, one of Nico's legitimate businesses. The owner scrambled to serve them personally, hands shaking slightly as he poured their coffee. Lena watched him scurry away, remembering how she used to be like him, afraid of Nico's power, his darkness. "You're thinking too hard," Nico murmured, reaching across the table to brush a strand of hair from her face. His touch lingered on her cheek. "I was thinking about how far we've come," she admitted. "From that first day when you demanded to know who broke my hip to now. If someone had told me then that I'd fall in love with the most dangerous man in New York." Nico's eyes darkened with possession. "You were mine from that first moment, even if neither of us knew it then." His voice dropped lower, sending shivers down her spine. "Every time you defied me, challenged me, it only made me want you more." Lena leaned into his touch. "And now, when I still challenge you?" A dangerous smile curved his lips. "Now it makes me want to remind you exactly who you belong to." The air between them crackled with tension, memories of passionate nights and desperate touches floating between them. Lena felt her cheeks flush, but she didn't look away. She never looked away from him anymore. They finished their coffee and continued their walk, the city growing darker around them. Nico's men followed at a discreet distance, always watching, always protecting. It was part of their life now, this constant vigilance. But between them, there was only peace. "I never thought I'd have this," Lena admitted as they reached the waterfront. The lights of the city sparkled on the dark water, beautiful and dangerous like the man beside her. "Love like this? A life like this?" "A life with a monster?" Nico's voice held a hint of his old bitterness. "A life with you," she corrected firmly. "All of you. The monster, the protector, the lover. Every part that makes you who you are." The last rays of sunlight painted the sky in shades of purple and orange, casting long shadows across the pier. Nico turned to her, his eyes reflecting the dying light as he pulled her into his arms. The world around them faded away. The guards, the city, everything but this moment. "We've survived the worst," he murmured, his forehead resting against hers. "But now we have everything. You and me. Together." I hope you like this story. Please share what's your favorite part of the story and where in the world you are watching from. Have a wonderful day.